Welcome to a very special paddock special of our deep dive. I mean, it is Sunday, the 29th of March, 2026, and frankly, I am still reeling.
Oh, we all are. I mean, the entire paddock is just completely upside down right now.
Right, because just 9 days ago, on the 20th of March, we got that announcement out of Llano Salerno in Italy. And it wasn't just, your standard corporate press release.
No, absolutely not. It was a complete shockwave. It fundamentally halted every single conversation in the motorsport world.
Exactly. I mean, rival manufacturers are probably tearing up their blueprints as we speak because the Basque prodigy, Jaime Busto, is back.
Back with the Beta factory team. It's a massive 2-year contract covering the 2026 and 2027 seasons, and the implications are just, well, they're staggering.
They really are. And for you, the listener, we are not just going to sit here and read a press release today or sort of a gossip about a writer transfer. We are here to decode a full-on technological rebellion.
That's the perfect word for it, a rebellion.
We are unpacking the source material from Chapter 5, A Fated Reunion, which details the exact weapon Beta has forged for him in secret, the newly unveiled Beta SINCRO 2T300 factory.
And this machine, I mean, it represents a fascinating counter-narrative to modern engineering. It is a motorcycle that deliberately and quite defiantly rejects the prevailing digital trends of our era.
To achieve pure, unfiltered analog perfection. And it does so with one singular, terrifying objective in mind.
Dethroning the undisputed absolute sovereign of the sport, Tony Bo.
Right, Tony Bo. So let us just examine the sheer gravity of this reunion. Because the text we are analyzing, it doesn't use standard PR speak, describes this March 20th announcement as, quote, epic defining.
The translation notes for that phrase are particularly illuminating, actually. It corresponds to the Japanese concept of jidai ogakisuru.
Jidai ogakisuru.
Spot on. It translates literally to drawing a physical line in history. It denotes an event of such dense gravitational pull that it marks the definitive end of one era and the absolute beginning of another. You look at the timeline of the sport, and there is an undeniable before and after this specific date.
That is an incredibly bold posture for a manufacturer to take. I mean, they are basically declaring that the landscape of trials writing, as we understood it on March 19th, is obsolete.
Exactly. And to understand that confidence, we really have to look at the landscape Jaime Busto have been navigating. The cessation of gas operations through 2024 and 2025.
Which was huge news in itself.
Massive. It left a looming question mark over the sport. A talent of his magnitude was suddenly thrust into this state of total flux.
And the strategic timing from Beta here is just remarkable because they weren't just passively waiting for the dust to settle, were they?
Not at all. The text explicitly states that the culmination of this revolutionary project was kept under wraps. And again, leaning on our source notes, the Japanese term hitakakushi is used.
Meaning a heavily guarded secret.
A fiercely protected secret, yes. Beta has been plotting a highly specific counteroffensive, observing Tony Bo's relentless dominance and, crucially, monitoring the growth of Jaime Busto.
I find this fascinating because it mirrors the classic hero's journey so closely. I mean, he began his journey with Beta. He first felt a profound connection to their machinery when he was just 16 years old.
But he couldn't remain there. The source refers to his departure as the beginning of a 7-year odyssey.
Right. A necessary departure. He had to venture out, experience different engineering philosophies, and ultimately mature.
He gained essential nourishment, as the text calls it, from those rival teams, from Honda and Gas.
I suppose if you only ever ride one brand, you only ever understand one language of physics.
Precisely. By navigating the upheaval of Gas, pausing operations and writing different machines, he learned what truly matters in a chassis or an engine profile.
He gained the perspective required to know exactly what he needs in a tool. A 16-year-old possesses raw, unrefined talent, but the athlete returning in 2026 brings a hardened, battle-tested intellect.
He knows precisely where the limits of digital machinery lie, because he has pushed against them for 7 long years.
I want you, the listener, to consider the last time you returned to a familiar environment. Perhaps a previous job or an old creative pursuit after years away.
It always feels a bit surreal.
It does. The physical space might smell the same, the faces might be familiar, but the interaction is fundamentally altered because your internal architecture has changed. You bring a completely new lexicon of experience to the table.
And that is the exact version of Jaime Busto walking back into the Beta factory today.
But if he had returned to find the same machinery he left behind, the reunion would be purely nostalgic.
And nostalgia doesn't win world championships.
It certainly doesn't. Beta knew that to lure him back, they had to forge a legendary steed that had essentially been waiting 17 long years for the return of its true master.
Which brings us to the philosophy of the machine itself. I mean, the name Synchro is almost miraculously coincidental when you trace his history back to his childhood in Gorlice.
Oh, the stories from Gorlice.
Yeah, where he displayed an intuitive, seemingly telepathic synchronization with motorcycles at just 3 years old. 3.
It's goosebump-inducing, really. And yet, this 2026 Incro model is built on a premise that seems entirely counterintuitive to the modern world. The text highlights its uncompromising devotion to the analog world.
It is a profound rejection of the current trajectory of motorsport. The documentation confirms the deliberate absence of electronic control devices.
And the stubborn maintenance of a traditional carburettor specification. Let me just process this for a second, because I am putting myself in the shoes of a modern motorsport engineer.
Must drive them mad.
Oh, completely. We are living in a year where Formula One cars are essentially hypercomputers with aerodynamic appendages attached.
And MotoGP machines utilize incredibly complex inertial measurement units to govern anti-wheelie, traction control, dynamic engine braking.
The entire industry is obsessed with fly-by-wire technology using algorithms to mitigate human error. So why would an elite athlete operating at the absolute razor's edge of physics demand less technology?
Well, it forces us to examine the unique environmental demands of trials riding. In circuit racing, the primary objective is forward velocity over a relatively predictable paved surface.
Right. The electronics exist to manage tire degradation and aerodynamic load at 200 miles an hour.
But trials riding, it is a negotiation with the impossible. It involves scaling vertical rock faces, navigating slick, moss-covered waterfalls, and leaping across massive voids between boulders from a complete standstill.
The stakes are immediate, and the required inputs are microscopic.
Exactly. Therefore, the difference between conquering a section and falling 30 feet into a ravine is dictated entirely by the rider's sensory connection to the contact patch of the rear tire.
And when you introduce an electronic fuel injection system or a heavily mapped digital throttle, you are essentially placing a computer between the rider's wrist and the combustion chamber.
You're breaking the circuit. The rider is no longer commanding the engine. They are merely submitting a request to a processor.
So they twist the grip and the computer goes, let me think about that for a millisecond.
That is the crucial distinction between assistance and interference. The rider twists the throttle, a sensor reads the position, the ECU interprets that data against its programming, and then decides how much fuel to deliver.
And in trials, that microsecond of delay, or worse, that digital interpretation, it ruins everything.
It severs the sensory loop. The computer might decide to artificially smooth out a sudden, harsh throttle blip because its algorithm perceives it as an error.
But that harsh blip was exactly what he required to lift the front wheel over a sudden, jagged ledge.
Exactly. The digital safety net becomes a straitjacket.
I see what you mean. It reminds me of the visceral difference between typing on a piece of smooth glass versus an old-school mechanical keyboard.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Right. On a touch screen, you lack that raw, tactile feedback. You are relying on autocorrect to interpret your intentions, and sometimes it aggressively changes your meaning, forcing you to stop and correct it.
It completely interrupts the flow state.
But with a mechanical keyboard, every keystroke provides physical resistance and an audible click. You know with absolute certainty what input you just delivered.
And that raw, tactile certainty is exactly what Jaime Busto requires. He needs to know that a 0.1 degree rotation of his wrist translates to a 0.1 degree increase in engine output.
Instantaneously.
Instantaneously. No digital debate whatsoever.
But look, removing that digital safety net exposes the raw mechanics to the world. If you cannot rely on lines of code to smooth over a sluggish engine response or a sudden spike in temperature, the physical engineering must be astonishingly perfect.
It has to be flawless. The physical architecture must bear the entire burden of performance. This required Beta to completely rethink the internal dynamics of the motorcycle, starting with its lungs and heart.
Okay, let's dissect that heart. Because the source text details a radical shift away from the long-standing architecture of the Beta EVO.
The old crankcase reed valve system.
Yes. For years, the EVO relied on that system. Now, for our listeners who understand the broad strokes of an engine, but perhaps aren't, stripping down 2 strokes in their garage on a Sunday afternoon, what makes a crankcase system limiting in this context?
Well, in a traditional 2-stroke design, the fuel and air mixture leaves the carburetor and enters the engine deep down in the crankcase, the lower belly of the engine where the crankshaft actually rotates.
And a reed valve acts as a one-way door to let it in.
Right. However, once that mixture is inside the crankcase, it must be forced upward through passages called transfer ports to finally reach the top of the cylinder, where the ignition actually occurs.
So the fuel mixture has to take the scenic route. It's a longer physical journey.
It is. And in the realm of engine dynamics, physical distance translates to a delay in response. It may be measured in fractions of a second, but it is a delay nonetheless.
The text reveals that the new Synchro engine abandons this entirely for a direct intake system, mounting the reed valve directly to the cylinder itself.
By bypassing the crankcase, they are drastically shortening the path the fuel and air must travel.
They are essentially placing the combustible material immediately adjacent to the spark.
Spot on.
If I am visualizing the fluid dynamics correctly here, it is like the difference between trying to blow out a candle through a long, coiled garden hose versus blowing it out through a short, wide drinking straw.
That's exactly it.
Through the hose, there is an inevitable lag as the air travels through the coils. Through the straw, the air strikes the flame instantly. The action and reaction are synchronized.
The synchronization is immediate. However, shortening that path creates a totally new engineering challenge.
Because of the carburetor.
Yes, because Beta insists on utilizing a purely mechanical carburetor, which relies on vacuum pressure to mix fuel and air rather than precise electronic injection. They must guarantee that the mixture burns flawlessly the millisecond it arrives in the cylinder.
And carburetors are notoriously sensitive, right, to atmospheric changes. They can run slightly rich or lean depending on the altitude or ambient temperature.
Very sensitive. And if the response is instantaneous, a hesitation caused by a rich mixture would be catastrophic on a vertical rock face.
So how do they solve for that analog inconsistency without using a computer?
They engineered the twin spark system. Instead of relying on a single spark plug to ignite the mixture from one central point, which is akin to dropping a single match into a pile of kindling and waiting for the flame to spread.
The twin spark introduces two distinct simultaneous points of ignition.
Exactly. Two separate flame fronts igniting inside the cylinder at the exact same moment.
The result must be a violent, incredibly efficient collision of those flame fronts.
It is absolute madness inside that cylinder. It ensures that every single molecule of the fuel-air mixture is consumed instantly and completely.
So this twin detonation pushes combustion efficiency to its absolute thermodynamic limit, entirely negating the traditional vulnerabilities of a carburetor.
It provides explosive, immediate power regardless of minor atmospheric fluctuations.
That is just breathtaking engineering. It's pure, unfiltered physics operating without a single line of code. You have the direct intake delivering the fuel instantaneously, and the twin spark detonating it with absolute totality.
But generating violent instantaneous power is only half the equation.
Right, because if you cannot control the transmission of that power to the rear tire, the machine becomes completely unrideable.
The engine may be the heart, but the nervous system dictating its application is the clutch.
And the source material places immense emphasis on the Synchro's clutch system, describing Beta's approach as equally thorough. It details a massive departure from the common single-point center-locked diaphragm types.
And even from Beta's own older EVO design, which utilized 6 independent coil springs.
The architecture they employed for him is an evolved 6-bolt circumferential diaphragm spring format. Let's break that down. I want to make sure I am picturing the geometry of this correctly. A circumferential design means the clamping force isn't applied from a single bolt in the center, nor is it provided by separate, isolated coil springs scattered around the housing.
Right. The diaphragm spring is a single continuous piece of metal, but it is secured and tensioned evenly around its outer edge by 6 specific bolts.
Securing the pressure plate and transmitting the drive through a total of 7 friction plates. The engineering rationale behind this specific geometry ties back to a concept highlighted in the translation notes, doesn't it?
Yes, Neborizuyoi.
Neborizuyoi, a term denoting tenacity.
It describes a mechanical component that absolutely refuses to yield, slip, or alter its fundamental character under the most extreme punishing loads imaginable.
And a clutch in a trials motorcycle endures a unique kind of torture, frankly. I mean, the rider isn't just using it to shift gears on a straightaway like in MotoGP.
Not at all. In trials, the clutch is the primary instrument of power delivery. A rider will frequently hold the engine at screaming high revolutions, storing massive amounts of kinetic energy while keeping the motorcycle completely stationary by holding the clutch lever in.
And when they release or dump the clutch, that stored energy is unleashed instantly to propel the bike up a vertical obstacle.
The friction generated between those plates must be staggering.
And where there is intense friction, there is intense searing heat.
And heat is the mortal enemy of analog precision. As temperatures skyrocket inside the clutch housing, the metal plates begin to warp microscopically.
The springs lose a fraction of their tension, the oil viscosity breaks down.
Exactly. This phenomenon is known as thermal fading.
How does thermal fading manifest to the rider in real time? I imagine it fundamentally betrays their muscle memory.
It absolutely destroys the sensory loop. A rider like Jaime Busto knows the exact millimeter of lever travel where the clutch bites and the power engages.
But if thermal fading occurs, that bite point physically migrates.
It might engage a fraction of a millimeter earlier or later than his nervous system expects.
And when you are suspended on the side of a slick waterfall, a fraction of a millimeter difference means you lose traction and fall backward into the abyss.
It severs the synchronization between man and machine. The 6-bolt circumferential design is Beta's brilliant solution to thermal fading.
By distributing the clamping force perfectly evenly around the entire circumference of the diaphragm spring, the structural integrity of the clutch remains absolute, even under immense thermal load.
The bite point remains locked in its precise location, regardless of the temperature.
The text uses such evocative language to describe this. It states that the clutch transmits his delicate fingertip sensations to the engine without the slightest deviation.
Without the slightest deviation, that is the absolute zenith of analog control.
I really want you, the listener, to consider the physiology of that for a moment. Hold your hand out right now and imagine applying pressure to a small metal lever with just your index finger.
Just a single finger.
Now imagine that through the tension of a mechanical cable translating through the 6-bolt heat-proof clutch, you can physically feel the exact grip of a rubber tire on a wet, mossy stone.
It's mind-boggling.
You can sense the micro vibrations of the rubber just as it begins to tear away from the rock, allowing you to ease off the pressure by a hair's breadth to maintain traction. It is surgical control.
It allows his nervous system to literally extend all the way down to the contact patch of the tire.
But to fully realize that extension, the skeleton holding this violent engine and surgical clutch together must be equally revolutionary.
You have to examine the chassis. The documentation outlines a hydroform design, and crucially, the integration of the fuel tank directly into the frame itself.
Let's talk about hydroforming. It's a marvel of modern manufacturing, but here it's serving an analog philosophy.
Right. Rather than welding together straight cylindrical steel or aluminum tubes, hydroforming utilizes highly pressurized fluid to expand metal tubing outward into a complex mold.
This allows the engineers to create complex organic shapes that vary in thickness, eliminating the structural weaknesses and the rigid points of traditional weld seams.
It allows them to dictate the exact physical behavior of the metal under stress. Which brings us to another really critical concept from the source notes. Shinari. The engineered capacity for lateral flex?
In many motorsport disciplines, maximum structural rigidity is the ultimate goal. You want a frame that absolutely refuses to twist.
But in the unpredictable terrain of trials, a perfectly rigid frame is a massive liability.
Because if the frame cannot absorb lateral energy, that energy has to go somewhere.
It reflects straight back down into the tires.
Exactly. Imagine dropping a rigid diamond frame off a 10-foot ledge onto an angled boulder. The suspension will handle the vertical compression, but the violent sideways force will cause the perfectly stiff frame to simply ricochet off the rock.
The tires lose contact with the earth, and the rider completely loses their line.
The bike effectively bounces sideways. Shinari is the deliberate microscopic bowing of the frame upon impact. So the chassis acts as a secondary lateral suspension system.
Spot on. It absorbs the kinetic shock, keeps the tires glued to the obstacle, and then smoothly returns to its original geometry. It breathes with the terrain.
But Beta took the architecture even further. By hiding the fuel tank within this hydroform structure, they fundamentally altered the physics of the machine's handling. The text notes a thoroughly low center of gravity and centralized mass.
Centralizing the mass is the absolute secret to making a heavy object feel weightless in motion.
In a traditional motorcycle configuration, the fuel tank sits high up, straddling the frame directly in front of the rider's chest.
And gasoline carries significant weight.
Yeah.
As it sloshes back and forth high up on the chassis, it creates a pendulum effect.
A top-heavy pendulum actively fighting the rider's attempts to balance. Let's ground this in a relatable physical experience for the listener.
Please do.
If you are preparing for a difficult hike and you pack your heaviest gear, your water bladders, your cast iron skillet right at the top of your backpack near your shoulders, your center of gravity is destroyed.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Every time you navigate uneven footing and lean slightly to the left, the high weight of the pack violently pulls you further in that direction.
You expend a massive amount of physical energy simply fighting to stay upright.
But if you unpack that bag and place the heaviest items deep at the bottom, strapping them tightly against your lower back and hips, the dynamic completely shifts.
The weight is still there, but because it is anchored at your pivot point, it becomes an extension of your body. You can twist, jump, and lean, and the mass moves fluidly with you.
That is the exact physics Beta achieved by integrating the fuel tank low inside the frame. They took the sloshing, unstable mass of the fuel and concentrated it tightly around the foot pegs.
Which is the pivot point where the rider's weight anchors to the machine.
Exactly. So when he shifts his hips a fraction of an inch to maintain his balance on a razor-thin ledge, the bike reacts instantly, without any top-heavy inertia fighting his movement.
The integration of the centralized mass, the breathing hydroformed frame, the heat-proof surgical clutch, and the explosive analog engine, it all converges to blur the line between machinery and biology.
The Synchro ceases to be a tool he operates. It becomes an anatomical extension.
Which brings us to the emotional and psychological climax of this entire narrative. This reunion on March 20th wasn't just about a new contract or an innovative piece of engineering.
It was an awakening.
The quote from Jaime Busto upon mounting the Synchro encapsulates this perfectly. He stated, quote, "The anima, the soul, I first felt at 16 has now perfectly synchroed with my body."
Using a word like anima, soul, to describe a motorcycle carries profound philosophical weight, especially from an elite athlete operating at the pinnacle of global competition.
We often reduce professional sports to a purely empirical exercise, don't we?
Constantly. We obsess over telematics, heart rate variability, and biometric data, treating athletes as biological algorithms that simply need optimizing.
But his invocation of the anima rejects that sterile view. He is acknowledging that at the absolute highest echelon of human performance, logic and data are insufficient.
There must be a resonance between the creator of the instrument and the master who wields it.
A fusion of Basque intuition and Italian engineering.
When he was 16, he felt the latent potential of that anima, but he lacked the hardened experience to fully harness it.
Now, after his 7-year odyssey through the paddock, his physical capability and mental fortitude have caught up to the machine's potential.
And the machine itself was evolving in secret to meet him, stripping away the digital interference so that absolutely nothing stood between his anima and the earth.
This brings us to the ultimate, rather terrifying question. Why go to such obsessive lengths? Why dedicate years of heavily guarded research to build a perfectly analog weapon in a digital age?
The text provides the explicit answer. It states that the Synchro is the one and only weapon capable of breaching the stronghold of the absolute sovereign, Tony Bo.
Let's examine the translation notes for that phrase because it frames the entire endeavor. Yajo okuzusu.
Breaching the stronghold.
It is a brilliant metaphor because it accurately reflects the reality of the sport. It doesn't describe Tony Bo merely as a competitor to be defeated in a race.
No, it frames him as a heavily fortified, impenetrable castle, a literal stronghold.
Anyone familiar with his unprecedented dominance understands why that metaphor is chillingly accurate. He is the absolute sovereign. He has accumulated a wall of world championships so immense that no other rider has been able to see over it for a generation.
He has perfected the art of winning. He is an institution unto himself.
And what Beta is acknowledging with the Synchro project is the futility of symmetrical warfare.
You cannot simply engineer a motorcycle that is 5% lighter or features a 5% more efficient electronic map and expect to overthrow a sovereign who has spent a decade fortifying his defenses against those exact metrics.
If you attempt to fight a digital algorithmic war against Tony Bo, you have already lost.
Because he occupies the high ground. To breach a stronghold of that magnitude, you must engineer a paradigm shift. You must fundamentally alter the rules of engagement.
While the rest of the paddock is frantically trying to write better lines of code, Beta decided to forge a better soul.
They created a mechanical entity that communicates on an unfiltered analog frequency that his digital defenses are simply not equipped to intercept.
The instantaneous response of the direct intake, the violent efficiency of the twin spark, the surgical tenacity of the 6-bolt clutch, and the lateral breathing of the hydroformed frame.
They are not just components. They are the structural elements of a battering ram designed specifically for Jaime Busto's hands.
It is the dawn of a new era, Jidai Ogakisuru. The line in the sand has been drawn, and the paddock will never be the same.
Truly sensational stuff.
The depth of this narrative is truly remarkable. We have explored the physics of fluid dynamics, the metallurgy of heat dissipation, and the psychology of a 17-year destiny. But I want to connect this incredible saga back to you, our listener.
The underlying philosophy of the synchro really transcends motorsport, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We live in a society that is relentlessly pushing us toward digital mediation. We are constantly offered the next application, the next algorithm, or the next automated hack to purportedly optimize our performance and smooth over our human imperfections.
We are actively encouraged to place digital layers between ourselves and our work.
The assumption is always that more technology equals greater capability.
But here we have the greatest motorcycle rider in the world, supported by a team of lead Italian engineers, determining that the only way to achieve the impossible, the only way to dethrone an absolute sovereign, is to aggressively strip all of those digital layers away.
To return to a state of pure, unfiltered analog connection.
It begs a necessary question about where we place our trust.
It asks us to look at our own lives and identify where we might be allowing a computer to do the feeling for us. Where are we accepting digital interference under the guise of assistance?
A powerful thought to end on.
Perhaps the ultimate competitive advantage, the key to breaching whatever stronghold you are facing in your own life, isn't found in a software update. Perhaps it is found in reconnecting with your own raw, tactile anima and trusting your own surgical control. Thank you for joining us on this Paddock special. Discovering the profound mechanical and human depths behind a simple March 20th headline has been an absolute privilege. Keep seeking out those pure connections, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Listen, 2018, the choice is made, leaving the Honda, leaving the four-stroke shade. I need the wildness, I need the raw response. Jaime Busto, back on the hunt. Back to the two-stroke, snapping the lead. Analog craving, that is the creed. Vertigo, logic, EFI, and the diva. Modern approach, but the soul comes later. Doggy lamp can't help in the fight, but something is missing in the middle of the night. Synchro, synchro, analog heart. Synchro, synchro, tearing it apart. No senses needed when the animal screams. Jaime Busto, fulfilling the dreams. Back to the rhythm, back to the start. Fingertips feeling the carbon take, long before senses can even awake. Cells in my body, sensing the ground. A shivering soul is the only sound. 2023, I'm the king in the way, threatening the throne of the Tony Bo stage. Structural change, 2025. Gas gone, but I'm still alive. Strategic shift, parent company games, but my mind is clear among the flames. Time Listen. "2018, the choice is made. Leaving the Honda, leaving the four-stroke shade. I need the wireless, I need the raw response. Jaime Busto, back on the hunt. Back to the two-stroke, snapping the leg. Analog craving, that is the creed. Vertigo logic, EFI in the data. Modern approach, but the soul comes later. Dougie left in, helping the flight. But something is missing in the middle of the night. Hey, hey, hey! Synchro, 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 synchro. Analog high, synchro, synchro. Tearing it apart. No sense in meeting when the animals scream. Jaime Busto, fulfilling the dreams. Back to the rhythm, back to the start. Fingertip feeling the carbon take. Long before senses can even away. Cells in my body sensing the ground. The shivering soul is the only sound. Hey! 2023, I'm the king in the wave. Hey! Threatening the throne of the Tony Bo state. Hey! Hey! Structural change, hey! 2025. Hey! Gas gone, but I'm still alive. Hey! Strategic shift, parent company gains. But my mind is clear among the flames. Hey! Time to return to the animal home. No more wandering, no more to roam. March 2020, 2026.